Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Acupuncture's My Life. Now, I've got a large amount of feedback on the episode discussing individuals who should basically never drink wine, all right? And many of you young ladies were pretty upset with that episode, although you understood the angle in which I was coming from relative to certain disorders an individual may be suffering from. Okay. But it had to be told, and I appreciate the response over the Acupuncture's My Life app. And if you don't already have it downloaded, it's free. Go to your app store. So many benefits to having the Acupuncture's My Life app. But now in this episode, I want to discuss individuals, which types of individuals, or individuals suffering from certain disorders who should never drink coffee. And I know, again, many individuals are going to be upset, but this is a reality, and this is why you listen to Acupuncture's My Life podcast. I've discussed coffee in past episodes so many times, and why you should switch over to herbal teas. To many individuals, coffee is more of a negative than a positive for them. And in cases as such, they should consider herbal teas instead. And there are various types of people who should never touch coffee. Let's just say one is individuals who suffer from irritable bowel syndrome. Why? Because, let's say, caffeine tends to increase a person's frequency for bowel movements, right? And then they can also experience diarrhea as a result of drinking coffee. And that's one of the main symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. So if you suffer from IBS, you really want to look to avoid drinking coffee. Because to an acupuncturist, drinking coffee can impair the function of both the spleen and stomach. Worsening your abdominal pain. Just worsening the symptoms of IBS. And you see, once the spleen and stomach, their functions become impaired, right? Prolonged impairment of the spleen's functions to transform and transport fluids throughout the body, along with also disturbance of the large intestine's functions of moving bowels. Prolonged impairment of the spleen and stomach's functions can injure the kidneys. It can ultimately lead to dysfunction of the liver, spleen, intestines. If you suffer from IBS, sit with an acupuncturist. Acupuncture can help. Another, I would say, are individuals who suffer from glaucoma. because that pressure on the eyes, the intraocular pressure, increases when you drink coffee. So if you suffer from glaucoma, you want to see an acupuncturist and look to avoid coffee. And also, even if you have an overactive bladder as well. Because caffeine in coffee tends to increase both urinary frequency as well as urgency. So if you have an overactive bladder, again, you want to avoid coffee. Another are individuals who, let's say, have a heart condition, like they experience or they suffer from arrhythmias. Now, coffee can increase, albeit temporarily, for the most part, a person's blood pressure and their heart rate. So now, if you have a pre-existing heart condition, switching to herbal teas, but I'm not just going to openly say switch to herbal teas. See an acupuncturist, and they'll recommend what's best for you as far as teas go. Because if you have a pre-existing heart condition, coffee is not the best route. It really isn't. Let's say when it comes to arrhythmias, you see, an acupuncturist understands that arrhythmias usually occur as a result of some form of heart pathology, whether it's primary or secondary. Now, to an acupuncturist, some arrhythmias tend to be due to, let's say, primary conditions of deficient qi, as well as blood failing to nourish the heart, or deficient yang failing to warm the heart. So this is why, if you have a pre-existing heart condition, see an acupuncturist right away. It's best that you do so. And I say over and over, along with seeing a physician on an annual basis for regular checkups, make regular wellness visits with an acupuncturist. It's for your own good. But other individuals, in my opinion, who should look to avoid coffee are pregnant women. You really want to be careful when it comes to drinking coffee, because you want to minimize your risk of miscarriage, premature labor, low birth rate. This is important. And I know, and I've experienced this in the past in talking to pregnant women about this, and they felt, well, what if I limit myself to 1-2 cups of coffee? And I usually just tell them there is no safe limit. Look to avoid it. And I've recommended herbal teas that, to this day, most of them have not gone back to drinking coffee. And speaking of pregnancy, also, if you're breastfeeding. So if you're breastfeeding, you should not be touching coffee, because the caffeine, it's a stimulant. It's like a diuretic. So you're increasing your risk for dehydration at that point if you're breastfeeding and you're drinking coffee. So if you're pregnant, or if you've given birth and you're breastfeeding, avoid coffee. Try and stay away from it. Another reason to avoid coffee is if you suffer from some type of sleep disorder, which is why I've said in so many Acupuncture's My Life podcasts, you suffer from a sleep disorder, see an acupuncturist right away. Sleep is very important. That's why I emphasize right away. And suffering from a sleep disorder and drinking coffee, it just creates an even more vicious cycle over time, because poor night's sleep, you're going to want that pick-me-up from coffee. And then the worse it gets with sleep, the more coffee you'll find yourself drinking. And it'll perpetuate a cycle of poor sleep and fatigue. So if you suffer from a sleep disorder, see an acupuncturist. It's important that you do so. Also, let's say, and I've spoken about this along with the panel of holistic experts on acupuncturesmylife.tv about coffee and suffering from anxiety and being prone to panic attacks. If you're suffering from any mental and emotional disorder, it's important that you see an acupuncturist. And it's important that you avoid coffee, especially if you experience bouts with anxiety. Dealing with anxiety is important. You want to address that. You don't want to blanket it. And if you want to learn more, watch acupuncturesmylife.tv, because you have to understand, coffee being a stimulant, it can worsen anxiety for some individuals, especially if you experience regular anxiety or panic attacks. You want to stay away from coffee, because ultimately it's about your health, and health is wealth. The wealth is not in an app on your phone or in the stock market. It's not in the bank. It's not in the safe. It's not in your purse. It's not in your pocket. Nor is it under your mattress or in the shoebox in the closet. And it's not under the doghouse in the backyard. The wealth is in you. That's where the wealth is. The wealth is in you. This is why you listen to Acupuncture's My Life podcast. But you know, people with diarrhea should avoid coffee as well. But coffee really gets your bowels moving. And if you're struggling with diarrhea, you want to avoid coffee as much as possible. So sort of think of that combination. A person struggling with diarrhea and drinking coffee every day and can't figure out why the diarrhea persists. Again, see an acupuncturist, because this is a sign that there's some form of impairment in the middle jiao. And an acupuncturist would know what to do and how to deal with that. Also, individuals with epilepsy should look to avoid coffee, because the frequency of seizures would increase, or can increase, as a result of drinking coffee. So you really want to be careful with that. And you know something, this is going to sound really crazy, but I'm noticing kids under the age of 12 are starting to drink coffee, and I totally do not agree with that. And I mean, because the caffeine, it makes a person jittery. It can. And this can be a noticeable, serious side effect when it comes to kids, because it'll increase their heart rate. You'll notice they'll start to feel anxious more. They'll have difficulty concentrating. It'll affect their stomach. Try and keep your child away from coffee. Understand that coffee is pretty, it's very acidic. And it can damage their teeth, increase their risk for cavities. Another are individuals that suffer from heartburn or acid reflux, as they would call it, gastroesophageal reflux, GERD. Because coffee tends to loosen a person's lower esophageal sphincter. And that's that little valve that exists between the esophagus and the stomach. And when that happens, stomach acid can enter into the esophagus. And that's that heartburn that you feel. So you really, if you suffer from heartburn, acid reflux, whatever you want to call it, you really want to avoid drinking coffee. But this episode has just been me giving advice as to individuals who should look to avoid coffee at all costs. Because if you notice your symptoms of these various disorders in which I discuss worsening, it could be due to that cup or cups of coffee in which you're drinking. So think about it. Give it some serious thought. And letting go, getting rid of coffee, taking it out of your life, and adding acupuncture to your life. Make acupuncture a part of your life, okay? Because acupuncture is my life. What's yours?